It is 6 o'clock, so I'm going to call the meeting of the Londonderry Master Plan Steering Committee to order for January 16th, 2025. If we could all rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So I want to open the floor to anyone that has any input or other comments from the public. All right. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move on. I'm going to skip reviewing and approving of minutes for now. But we'll move on to presentations on innovative housing in Londonderry. Sylvia, you want to take us away?
Yeah, I'm gonna first make our screen big so we can see Zach and James. So we're lucky over at Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. We have a really extraordinary team, and some of you have seen presentation, I don't know when that was, maybe a year ago or so, when Zach and I presented on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment to the Planning Board. And Zach is our senior GIS analyst and general data guru. And so I asked Zach to start us off today because there was a lot of conversation at our last meeting where we were talking about affordable housing. And when we were reviewing the survey results, every single age group brought up affordable housing to some level. And so I asked Zach to review, in general, affordable housing and what that means here in Londonderry. So, and then I'll introduce Jim afterwards.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now. How does that look in the room?
That looks like your your slide notes.
Yeah.
Slide notes. Let me duplicate it then. Whoa. That's never happened before.
Do you have two screens?
How now?
Now it's good.
Okay, yeah. So, Sylvia mentioned I'm Zach Swick. I'm a GIS analyst with the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. If you're not familiar with GIS, it's basically cartography mixed with computer science mixed with data analysis. And I wanted to quickly go over real quick what the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, because I'm going to refer to the region many times in this presentation. And this is the region we're talking about. 14 communities that surround Manchester and stretch from Francistown in the west to Deerfield in the east and Wyndham in the south. So I'm going to set the stage now for housing in Londonderry. In 2020, there were 9,600 housing units in Londonderry, according to the decennial census. A housing unit is a single-family home, an apartment, a mobile home. Those all qualify as housing units. And then, according to the Office of Planning and Development, between 2020 and 2023, there have been 644 building permits in Londonderry. That doesn't mean all those got built. These aren't COs. These are, a building permit, and if somebody didn't build 1 year, they might have to go back, so there might have to be duplication. What does the housing makeup look like in Londonderry? So, of the percentage of total housing units, 82% are single family, and 16 are 2 units or more in the building. I want to look at this generalized land use map of Londonderry real quick. There are a lot of problems with the map. One is that the data is pretty old. This is from 2020. You've had some number of changes since then. This is also from the Department of Revenue Administration, and they get a lot of stuff right, but they don't get everything right. So this is when we actually do work with this data. I'll go ahead and get it straight from the assessor. But here you can see everything in that brown is a single family parcel. So you can see how it kind of stretches out throughout the whole town. It makes up the majority, or a plurality at least, of the surface area. I don't have any, the census data doesn't, there's no census data by town for housing units before 1980. So I had to use a population just as a corollary. So this is Londonderry's population over time, going from 1850 to 2020. And you can see there, starting about 1960, there's a huge boom in population, and one would assume, obviously, that there was a huge boom in housing production at the same time. Now, in between 1960 and 2000, Londonderry's population grew by 21% annually, so doubling every 5 years. But we do have data for 1980, so here we have the average annual net new housing units. We say net new because we don't actually know how many were built, because if there were some that were raised, so we just know the net new that were built. Here we have 1980 broken out by decades out to 2020, and so in 1980 to 1990, on average each year 220 units were built in Londonderry. You get to 1990 and 2000, 100, 2000, 2010, 110. The last decade, it's been 110. And so, if we don't look at the absolute number of units, we look at the percentage. You can see that in the 1980s, it was growing about 5% every year. And then by the time you get into the 90s through to today, you get down to about 1 to 1.5%. We also can look at building permits. The Office of Planning and Development has been tracking building permits going back, well, before 1990, but the system they currently use now begins in the 90s. So here we have in black, these are the total number of housing unit permits that are issued, and this is for the units themselves, not necessarily the buildings. So you could have, a multi-family building, only one permit, but you have 6 units in it or whatever. So the black is the total, and the blue there is the number of permits for structures with 2 or more units within the building. So you can see there was a bump there in 2004, and then there's been a couple bumps in the last couple of years. I believe, looking at 2023 data, there's been a slowdown since then. So let's talk about the households in Londonderry. 1 in 3 households in Londonderry includes someone under the age of 18. And 1 in 3 households in Londonderry includes someone who is over the age of 65 or older. 1 in 6 households in Londonderry rents. We look at just owner-occupied households, so these are households where the person owns their home. A majority of owner-occupied households are at most 2 people. When you look at renter-occupied households, 7 in 10 are at most 2 people. So let's look at Londonderry home sales. So these are actual homes, the number of homes that sold in Londonderry every year, going back to 1990. And then for 2024, we only have data right now for January through July. And that's part of the reason why you see it fall really precipitously there. But again, in the 90s, there's a little bit of, it looks like there's a little slowdown in the 90s, or I'm sorry, 1990, and then it picks up again going through until the Great Recession, when the housing market falls apart. And then when we get to about the time, about 2014, Londonderry's housing market begins to recover, and we see pretty steady up until the present. But this is all homes. If we look at just new homes, so these are only including new homes that were sold, there's a peak there in the 90s, and it slows down until today. We're seeing very few new homes being sold. We're going to talk about affordability. We need to talk about price. So this is the median Londonderry purchase price. Black line there is all units. The orange line is non-condominium, so your standard single-family house. And your green is condominium. And you can see pretty low bumps up there in the early 2000s. kind of steadies there during the Great Recession, and then there's a big spike beginning in about 2018. And you might say, well, yeah, last couple of years inflation has been running high. You would expect that. Well, if we account for inflation, we still see that spike. So the map on the left is the Londonderry's median purchase price, the nominal, which means the dollar value that it was that day. The one on the right is the real price, which is then adjusted for inflation. So even adjusting for inflation, the median purchase price in Londonderry has risen 60% since 2019. Renting is a little more complicated. We do, the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority tracks rents, but it's sometimes not great. So you can see in some of those first 3 years, we have some gaps in the data. Part of that is just because Londonderry didn't used to have as many places to rent. And so, the nominal price for gross rent refers to your rent plus everything else related to housing. So utilities, renter's insurance, etc. Has been around 15%, 1,500 during that time. And if we look at real median rent, it actually has declined some since the early 2000s, and that's very surprising.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why exactly that happened. It didn't happen anywhere else in the region. I can assure you that my rents did not decline over that period. I think part of it might be that most of the places that rented back then were homes as opposed to apartments, and those just would have a higher overall cost than if you lived in a multifamily unit. We're going to talk about what's affordable. We'll talk about how much do people make in Londonderry. So here we have the Londonderry real median household income. This is adjusted for inflation to inflated out to $2023. So in 1980, the median household in Londonderry made in 2023 around $85,000 a year. By 2013, that had risen to about $118,000, and in 2023, it was $130,000. So it's gone up considerably over the last 30 years. But the median purchase price in Londonderry in 2023 was still 4 times the median household income. But let's look at more than just median. So this is the income distribution for Londonderry. So on the left there, you'll see Londonderry, and then the percentage of the overall population that makes less than 25 grand, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200, 200 or more. And I also threw in there for comparison Manchester and Windham, which are 2 towns in the region, obviously, and then the region itself and New Hampshire, so you can get an idea of the distribution. So Londonderry clearly has a higher skewed or higher incomes, but it's not at the level of like Windham, where you can see that almost half of all households make over $200,000. In Londonderry, 2,740 households are housing cost burden. What does that mean? Well, when we talk about what is affordable in the planning and housing fields, if somebody spends more than 30% of their income on housing, they are housing burden and it is not affordable. So a majority of renters, households are cost burdened within Londonderry. You can see that there's not much difference between households with a mortgage versus those without. Part of that has to do with the fact that those without a mortgage are going to be older and therefore have lower incomes. And that cuts into any benefit that they get from not having a mortgage. So there are 2 different types of subsidized housing within Londonderry. There's income restricted housing units. So that could be anything like there's some kind of deed to ensure that it's a workforce. You can only make a certain amount. And then there's the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly known as Section 8. And that, as opposed to the unit having a restriction on it, it's the restriction comes with the renter. So in Londonderry, this is a few years old now, but in Londonderry there were 550 income restricted housing units within the municipality, which is really good. That's very high for our region. That leaves out, we don't know where that income level threshold is. So, but, compared to, let's see, Manchester, which is obviously a much larger city, has, only 3,000. There aren't as many housing choice voucher units currently in Londonderry is about 90. And so in total, I guess it's about 640 units that have some kind of rent subsidization. Okay, lastly, I'm going to go over looking at rental affordability for both, rental and homeowners affordability. As Sylvia mentioned, we did our regional housing needs assessment a couple of years ago, and as part of that, all the RPCs worked with a consultant called Root Policy to build a couple different packages for us. One of those was we wanted to look at rental and housing. We wanted to look at affordability in terms of what can different occupations afford. So we had them go out. Excuse me. We had them go out and develop scenarios. So what we did is we got the median gross rent by region. So we got that from the New Hampshire Finance Authority. We looked at the wage income for 15 occupations by region. So these are what a nurse makes in our region, not hypothetically in the state, but this is what actual real people make within the region. And then we divided it up into 3 tiers. Entry level, which is the average of the bottom third of wages for occupations in that area. Median, and experience, the average of the top 2 thirds for wages for that occupation for the region. We made some assumptions, obviously. One is that these would be wage earner households. One wage earner households. And that, again, households would be considered housing cost burden if their gross rent is 30% or more of their wage income. So here we have the breakdown. You can see at the top left there, in 2022, the median rent was $1,500 a month. I'll just note in the bottom right there, you can now see that the SHPC median rent for 2024 is $1,800. So it's gone up 19% over those 2 years. And then here we have, is the median rent affordable to, again on the left, you can see 15 different occupations, assemblers and fabricators going to waiters and waitresses. And then on the right, we have it divided into 6 columns, where you have 2 columns together for entry level, asking whether or not it's affordable, and then cost difference. What is the difference between what the person actually makes versus what they would need to make to not be housing cost burdened? So we have the entry level there, the median wage, and the experience wage. And so, at the entry level wage, the only occupations of those 15 that would not be housing cost burden are are engineers and registered nurses. By the time we get to median wage, electricians and police and sheriff patrol officers also can now afford that median rent. And then again, as we go out to experienced, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers can now afford the median rent. Home ownership is a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult to model. As you can guess, how much you pay for your house or every month can depend a lot on when you bought, how much you put down, what the interest rate was, all those sorts of things. So we had to make a few more assumptions here. Again, we got the median home price for the region. We looked at the same wage income for 15 occupations by region, again broken up again into those 3 different classifications. And then we had to make some assumptions. We made an assumption that these would be 1.5 wage earner households, and that's because most owners, there's 2 people living there, and so you hypothetically have 2 incomes, and one person typically makes more than the other. So this was just kind of a simplification to cover that. The interest rate at that time was 5.5, and we assumed that these weren't going to be first-time homeowners. These were going to be somebody who previously owned the home and was coming into the purchase with a down payment. So we assumed a 30% down payment, and then 40% of the payment would be going to things that aren't the mortgage. So that's property taxes, utilities, insurance, etc. Again, households are going to be housing cost burdened if their housing costs are more than 30% or more of their income. Then we have our assumptions there across the top. At that time, the median home price was about $390,000 for a region. If you look down at the bottom right, today, or in 2024, median purchase price was about $490,000. So we've gone up 26% in those 2 years. So just keep that in mind when we go through all this. Again, an interest rate of 5.5, down payment of 30%, and 40% of the payment going to other costs besides the mortgage. We have our our occupations there on the left. The difference here, you can see the price difference here is the difference between what the person can afford to pay for a house versus what the house costs. So an engineer making the entry-level wage would need to, could only buy, could afford the median home price if it was $24,000 less. So then again, at the entry level, nobody there can afford. The engineer is getting kind of close. When we move on to median, the engineer and the registered nurse can now afford it. But that's it, And then when we move on to experienced, again, the engineer, the police officer, and the registered nurse can afford it, and the electrician is pretty close. He's $6,000 short. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Should I stop sharing?
Sure.
Actually, why don't you keep it up in case we have any,
Fair enough.
anyone that wants to jump back to the slides. So, board, I'll open up to any questions that you guys have. Reactions?
The growth wasn't as fast as, it didn't seem as bad as what it feels like in town.
What it feels like, yeah, so so you're talking about like the growth, the overall growth?
Like the amount of, I don't know, that was just my take. I'd have to look at it. That's what I was like, 1% versus.
Do you mean population?
No, I mean like driving around town, looking at how much is being built versus what these numbers are showing. I feel it looked.
Zach, could you actually? That's a good question. Could you go back to the slide where you had the growth, the annual growths from I think it was like 1980.
Interesting was the affordable housing too, compared to say other towns. I was like, Wyndham has nothing. Like they don't. That's.
Well,
we look to have a lot.
I was surprised at how many affordable income units we do have compared to
Me too.
population. We're doing pretty well.
That's my takeaway too.
And again, it's not the town's responsibility to provide affordable housing. The market drives it.
That's right.
And so you could zone something, but I was pleasantly surprised,
Yeah, that was noticeable to me.
Yeah.
So on this slide here, we have what? So basically from 2010 to 2020, it's telling us that annually Londonderry has 110 net new housing units going up, right?
Supposedly.
Correct.
That's yeah.
And in mid-80s, was it, they put the moratorium on or did the 1 acre minimum in town for building? What did they do? They slowed down building, I feel like, in the 80s, early 90s, didn't they?
Put a growth management ordinance in our, didn't you?
They did something.
Yeah, I would love to be able to have the housing data going back to 1980s because it was clearly
Well, they have a little bit there, right?
huge growth.
Yeah,
Because there was like 400 or 500 houses a year built.
yeah, Art Rugg, 11 Pine Hollow Drive, Vice Chair of the Planning Board. Yes, the mid-'80s were, let me put it simply, awful for growth of the number of houses. We were probably approaching 400 units a year. And the tax rate was about the highest in the state, and people were about revolting. That's when I came here. And it's all, wow. So what did I do? Run for selectman. And what happens? I win. Now I got to solve the problem. But there was, I know it was probably like 82, 83. This is before I came, but when I did come, I got a lot of history about the town. And the town had tried to put a temporary moratorium. And I know the selectmen at that time were having the police, the fire, Public Works, and everything come before the Board of Selectmen to put something together. This is previous to I being on the board. And from that, they did have a growth management ordinance, and they put a limit of, I think it was 200 houses per year. Well, first thing that happened, it went to court. It happened quickly after that. The Superior Court ruled it's, illegal. You can't do it. So it was thrown out. And basically what the court said, you just can't have an arbitrary number. You got to have some science behind it. And the statute for, growth management is in New Hampshire, it's only a temporary item to allow you to catch up with your infrastructure to handle the population that you've got. So I think it was in '88 when I was on the Board of Selectmen, we put together a committee. In fact, we had an article for town meeting, Growth Management Committee. The committee spent 2 years and came up with this rather complicated mathematical formula for controlling growth. And we looked at the number of building units per year, for what the town's traditional rate was, how that compared to 6 of the surrounding towns. And then we looked at the school population, and that's really where the problem was because the schools were overfilled.
The school population was what was able to give you the growth.
That was, yes.
Because
What helped us the most was the Great Recession. And that's, you can see from Zach's graph, that's where things slowed down. But now things have picked up. They're not like they were back in the 80s. So you should feel lucky. But people really felt the pressure and the taxes, and it wasn't the amount of traffic there is now. The roads were kind of the same, but the condition of the roads were not as good as they are now. So we did get there, but it took 2 years of work with I think it was about 10 people on the committee. So we've had our growth problems, and the tax rate is no longer the highest in the state. We've gotten down to the median area. But what I found in my involvement with, town politics, that people always complain about taxes, and they always complain about growth. Those are the 2 items to run for office on.
I have a question about this chart. So the average annual net housing unit, so if you look at this, the second one that I'm looking at, the 1.25%, that is just, it's not like apartments. One apartment building would count as 1 unit?
No,
No?
one apartment in an apartment building would count as a unit. So this is agnostic here. This is saying it doesn't care whether it's an apartment or a
Okay.
single-family home or a condominium or a duplex. It's just how many livable units were created.
Oh, okay, and it's just a 2020. Be interesting
Yeah.
to see how, what it looks like now.
I think there's a big chunk of data missing.
I was just gonna say, like,
There
this
is.
looks great up to 2020, but we're missing the last 5
Yeah.
years, which is where we've seen some
If you
growth.
look at what's being built now,
One building is
in one development that's been going for a while, and you look at the proposed Technology Hill with 360 or 70, whatever the number is, these numbers are drastically going to change because of what's in front of planning board and what's being proposed. So that graph could look like this in the next 2 years, and that's part of the big rub in town.
Right.
The one thing to remember about those things though too, is they don't all hit in the same year. So I think everyone's taking into account things are in the future. Not all of those things in development or planned or even in process of being built right now are all gonna hit within 1 year. So that's gonna spread out over maybe the course of 3 years or something else. I'm not saying that makes the numbers smaller or bigger. I'm just saying,
You're
when
just
everyone thinks about it, they think of it all like it's gonna happen next year
4,700
and it's
units
not.
going up tomorrow.
But Sean, it could double or triple that number per year,
could.
even if it's spaced out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying
I mean,
anything
you're not gonna
about
build
the
them all in
number.
one day, but
Yeah.
you might still double or triple it annually for the next 5 years,
Right.
potentially,
Well-
which is huge.
Zach, do you have any of that building permit data for the last, like, 2 years or something? I thought.
Yeah, so that's right here. So you can see they come in big chunks. But, and so you can see like because they all come, or a bunch of them come online at once.
Right.
So that'd be the blue line the blue line there also includes, duplexes and fourplexes and that sort of thing. This is not just, large, multifamily. But you can see that is what has been built most recently in Londonderry.
But it's one permit for, say, an entire apartment building,
Correct.
though, too, right? Or is
No,
it a
no,
permit
it's
for
one
everyone
permit
still?
for here, well, yes, the actual building permit, it would be one, I assume one building permit for that. This is looking at the number of units.
Okay,
So,
I can't see
so
that, I'm sorry.
in 2022, 250 units
Oh,
were
I see on the
permitted.
side now, okay. Thank you,
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that they actually came,
available.
that they ever happened, because sometimes these projects, will be permitted and then there's a delay and they have to do it the next year or something like that. So there can be double counting.
Well, I saw statistics that I believe were for 2023, where Londonderry was the second highest issuer of building permits in the state. So we as a town are carrying more than our fair share
Yes.
of building permits. And I think that is the pain we feel,
Yeah.
is we don't see the same thing happening in our surrounding towns.
Yeah, Merrimack is the other one along 3, and Bedford. And all those towns are talking about the same thing we are, because I work with those towns.
And I know
So-
part of the attraction is our median income, because any of these multifamilies that want to be income controlled, it's based, they can charge a percentage of the median income, which means if they build in towns with a higher median income, they can charge higher rent. So they like the fact that they can charge the higher rents here.
That's a problem.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that's it.
it's, thanks, Marge. That's actually incredibly interesting. Yeah,
You're
Why
talking
aren't they
from
going
a
to Wyndham?
workforce housing perspective.
Well, there's,
There's two things.
right,
It's really-
there's
Yeah.
affordable housing, there's workforce housing. Those are two different definitions.
Correct.
And I actually have a little video that explains those, but, for another day. But there are things that these builders are getting subsidized to offer either workforce or affordable based on the median income. So they like it here.
When was the last time we put workforce housing? Like, what was the last development that had workforce
I
housing?
don't even think
I think it's McGregor.
It would have been McGregor Cut, which,
Oh, yeah.
that's what I'm getting at. That was, McGregor Cut was before my time on the board, so that's 6 or 7 years ago.
But isn't Technology Hill supposed to be workforce housing?
No.
No,
That's what they said when they came before
oh,
ZBA.
market rate, he
All
said,
market
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 rate.
rate.
Okay, all right.
So, okay, so let's, any other kind of slides that we want to kind of dissect? John?
I looked at this a little differently, I think, than a few people, in that I think what I saw is that entry-level folks, which I assume are younger people, can neither afford to rent or to buy a single home.
That's how
family
I-
home in
that's how I
Londonderry.
viewed it.
I mean,
Yeah.
period. So I don't know if that means we take discussions of housing for younger people off the table. I mean, if it's something that just can't happen, I guess it can't happen. unless you've got, and maybe that's the next presentation, some kind of creative way of
Right.
controlling market
Right,
price.
there's definitely kind of economics at play. Like, obviously, we're not going to be solving kind of some of the macroeconomic issues that are, impacting those numbers, and such like that. So, when I looked at those slides, I was like, you can't, from that data set, and Zach, this phenomenal work here.
Yeah.
From that data set, you have to, I mean, you have to be an engineer or an RN
Or
to afford.
live somewhere else and sold and made some money and
Right,
come in.
right, and even that's not even economically
Or you're
guaranteed, so.
doubling up. That's
Well-
why, the younger folks have roommates or
Right.
housemates
Or,
Yeah.
when they're renting.
Or ADUs.
right, you'd see that the popularity of ADUs now and the trend towards tiny houses.
Right.
And maybe we look to history for help with, what happened when there were housing crises before, and there has been. And maybe it's a situation where we have to resurrect something like boarding houses. That would be, a glorified college dorm where at least people have housing to start. And then, move up the,
But I think here, when you look at the area, Manchester, Derry, there are other areas that are more affordable. And I think, I can't speak for anybody here, but I mentioned this back in October, when I first looked to buy my first house back in 1985, my wife and I were both professionals. We couldn't buy where we wanted to buy. We looked around and bought where we could afford, and then maybe 15 years later we moved. So I think, again, we talked about that. Just because your family lives here in Londonderry doesn't mean you can live here till you maybe can afford it. I mean, that's another conversation. But
Right.
And the other thing is, a lot of these options that have higher densities and smaller homes and carry impact on the neighbors' values of their homes and real estate values. And how would you want that rooming house built next to your house, right? So there's a lot of factors here, right?
that's where your zoning comes in.
Right. Well,
Well, this is a good segue,
yeah,
I think,
it is a
Zach,
good segue.
into
zoning, yeah.
our second speaker. Thank you so much, Zach. So we have our principal planner, James Vale. Jim, are you there? He's been hanging out for a while. Thanks, Jim.
I am.
Oh.
It's always fascinating listening to Zach recite this data. So yeah, I've been interesting to watch.
Yes. So I asked James to, because of our last discussion again, really talking about affordable housing and some innovative solutions. So Jim in our office, he's done a lot of work around ADUs. He's also an architect, and he's sort of always got his finger on the pulse of innovative housing. So I asked if he would do a short presentation just to tease us on some ideas.
And Sylvia, and Jim, before you start, I just want to kind of, just make a comment here. Obviously, the purpose of this committee is to get all the information, get all the facts, so we're making informed decisions, and that's the purpose of these presentations. We're not here to make any decisions. We're not here to kind of sway one way or the other. It's to get the relevant information so we can make those informed decisions. So I just want to ensure that the community understands that, and that in that others of interested parties also kind of get that here. This is a long-term process that allows us to kind of get that information. So just wanted to kind of say that and level the kind of set the stage for Jim. And Jim, looking forward to this presentation.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, clarification. Just clarification, my own. While I have a degree in architecture, I am not a licensed architect. And I just take a moment to mention that because the American Institute of Architects is pretty fussy about that. So
He's right about that.
I will share my screen. is,
Yep, that's good.
yes, I can see it's full screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we'll talk about 3 subject areas today that, were mentioned by Sylvia in preparing for this. And so those 3 subjects are owner-occupied options for housing, accessory dwelling units, and then, we'll just touch upon some of the divisions of prefabricated housing, because I think it's worthwhile to at least understand what those are in order to inform your decision making. So the first thing I want to do is talk to you about housing options, especially what's referred to as nationally as the missing middle housing. And the first product I want to show to you guys is this Vermont Homes for All toolkit, which is a comprehensive package of tools to help both small developers, local municipalities, and homeowners get to a place where they can build the kind of housing that is, very common within a lot of village centers in New England. If you go drive through, Milford or through Goffstown, you'll see these little village centers, and you'll see buildings that look just like this. They exist all around us. And so I'm going to take a minute and go onto the webpage here, and hopefully this transfers over from the presentation. So this is the webpage. It is an official government webpage, and it was a product that was developed through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And within it, they have this toolkit as a PDF, and it has a bunch of other resources, such as webinars, PowerPoint slides, and really, quite interestingly, these pro formas that show how to build out these things. But what's really nice about the toolkit is it comes along with annual reporting, and it comes with a variety of house plans and direction on how to build them. So we don't have the time to go through all this, but I'm going to open it up just so people can see some of the products that exist in here. Should go a little faster in a minute here. Well, it's very slow. I apologize. But what we'll skim through, which I think is particularly interesting, is how the toolkit shows building products that are small but not single family. So it shows plans and concepts for everything from an ADU over a garage up to a 6-unit apartment building. And what's really nice about these is that they overlap really well with 2, 3, and 4 unit buildings overlap with federal home FHA, federal home loans. So you could go to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac and get a conventional loan for building up to 4 units, and that's really a powerful tool because you may or may not know Fannie Mae and FHA allow for very low down payments on housing through their conventional loans. So somebody could go and buy a 4-unit house, live in one of the units, and only pay 5% down, or in some cases 3.5% down, which is really quite impressive.
And James, the idea behind all of these, right, is that it's homeowner occupied. So the person building it, the owner, occupies one of the units. That's the idea. So, for example, and I think that's appealing for towns because you're always, how many times do you hear, well, the developer's just going to build it and leave? In this case, it's you're, a resident of Londonderry who wants to stay here. It could be someone who's actually wants to downsize, build something that they can live in that's on one floor and then rent to someone else so that they can stay here. But anyway, you keep going, Jim.
No, that's exactly right, Sylvia. And part of this is not just a direct line to the homeowner, right? Like a lot of what Vermont is trying to do with this toolkit is empower people who live in these communities to have the tools and skills and confidence and infrastructure within that town to build a product like this. And because essentially society at writ large in the United States has forgotten how to build these, or at least through the existing policy structure. And so this toolkit really lays out a clear and feasible path for, it could be a homeowner, it could be a builder who builds it and then sells it to owner occupied, or it could be a builder who builds it as an investment property. And under all three scenarios, a building like this can fit in a place that a lot more places that would be inappropriate for a large, say, courtyard multifamily building that has 25, 35, 50 units in it, right? Like, nobody wants to live next to that when they're in a single family home. But this in a village center or little neighborhood center might be much more acceptable to the public. One of the things I've seen over time is that the real aversion a lot of communities have to these things is the aesthetic of investment grade development. People have a real aversion to looking at it and seeing it in their backyard. But this can feel significantly different. So, for the sake of time, I won't go through all this, but I just wanted to point to the fact that this resource exists, and if there's an interest in it, we could dive deeper into any one of these things that it talks about. So, the other thing we already talked about this, is that Fannie Mae provides home loans for multifamily buildings for as low as 5%, and it's pretty flexible. Like a homeowner could buy a 4-unit complex for as much as $1.4 million using a federally insured home loan through the government, and it no longer has to require what were some pretty egregious vacancy tests, and so I won't get into the minutia of it, but basically a homeowner that wants to buy a 4-unit, let's say a 4-unit spec property is built that looks like this picture, and occupy one of those units, they can use the comparable rents in the region to help qualify them to get that loan and to buy that property. So these are all powerful tools. These are all things that policies can help facilitate becoming reality in a community. The next thing I wanted to touch upon was accessory dwelling units, and some of this is going to be remedial. Like, you guys probably know the difference between attached and detached accessory dwellings. In this graphic here, we just have a couple of little cartoons that somebody drew, and they illustrate what those different versions are. So on the left here, that's a very clear cartoon of a primary house, and then in red a standalone detached ADU. And my recollection is that Londonderry allows this. Mm-hmm. And then below that you have an attached ADU, so it's physically connected to the main house. On the other side, on the right hand side, you have a ADU that's built over a garage, which somebody might do new construction, or somebody might renovate their basement into an ADU. Other scenarios for ADUs, somebody might convert a space within their house. Although I think this is much less common than talked about. They're kind of all talked about equally, but conversions make a lot less sense because you end up destroying finished space to build finished space. And if you start looking at it from a financial perspective, it's not as appealing as, say, building new construction, especially when that new construction is detached. One of the things I would like to take credit on behalf of Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission and New Hampshire Housing is creating this research document called Policy and Program Models for Creating Accessory Dwelling Units in New Hampshire. And so this was a research report we wrote on behalf of New Hampshire Housing, looking at various policies and programs that municipalities, regional and state governments could implement to help facilitate the production of ADUs or increase production of ADUs. The big takeaway from this is that there is a host of good case studies for how to do to successfully implement programs, and we were able to decipher those into a series of tools. And so this matrix shows the host of tools. You know, there's a dozen tools here that we identified across 9 different case studies across the nation. And they can go from very easy things like reducing zoning barriers up to very sophisticated things like providing cash incentives to homeowners to design, permit, and build ADUs. And so, again, this is a place where if Londonderry is interested in exploring any one of these things and how it might fit into the future for the town, we could dive deep into any one of these policies and determine if it would be a good fit or something the town would like to structure as part of facilitating housing that feels appropriate to the community. One thing I did want to mention here is that there are good examples of builders doing this kind of work. And one example of a company building ADUs that just recently started doing business in the state of New Hampshire is this company called Backyard ADUs. And they do a fantastic job building what is a very consistent product in a very consistent way to meet demand. Now, this is not by any means an affordable product. You know, like an ADU that sits in a backyard that looks like this costs $300,000. But it's good to know how and where the market is meeting demand and what that price point is, because it can inform other decisions. Another topic that we wanted to touch upon was prefabricated housing. And so I just wanted to break this down a little, because there's often a lot of confusion about what exactly prefabricated housing is. And some people say, oh, well, that's a trailer. And other people say, no, like they're high performance buildings. And the truth is, all of that is true. And so it's worthwhile to just put a definition to it to help explain and have conversations about solutions that might make sense for your town. And so the definition I wanted to provide here are twofold. The first is modular. In modular construction are panels, boxes, even full units. And the key defining element for modular construction is that it's permitted through the local building code, meaning the town of Londonderry's building inspector is going out there and inspecting the building as it's assembled and giving a final certificate of occupancy for that building. There are really good companies building high quality products located right here in New Hampshire doing this kind of work. Unity Homes is an example. They're actually located in Unity, New Hampshire, and they're part of a bigger assembly of businesses under the direction of a gentleman named Ted Benson. He does really good work. He's a well-renowned, he's a renowned architect, and in the image here is of their splash page, but as you can see, the way they're putting this building together is large panels that are assembled by a crane. Ultimately, a building like this would be inspected by your local building inspector using the local building code, and it would be a house just like any other house. It would qualify for a mortgage. Another example of prefabricated housing is manufactured housing, right? And so this is the thing that a lot of people fear. And so this is an example of a manufactured home that exists on a metal frame. And typically, homes built on frames are considered manufactured largely in part because they're permitted through something called the HUD code, which is this totally separate code from local building code. And this is allowed in the United States, although zoning has pretty significantly restricted where these exist. but it's worth noting that they exist, and it's worth noting that in some scenarios, homes built in this form can qualify for mortgages. And we've seen some unique instances lately where these actually are starting to appreciate in value instead of depreciate in value, which has been the traditional case. There are companies building products like this in New England. For example, this company called Vermod builds super high performance modular homes that are zero net energy on behalf of the state of Vermont. And often these end up in resident owned communities, if you're familiar with that concept. So a homeowner is getting mortgages and they're buying these things and they're getting a house where they don't actually have any electric, they don't have any heating, cooling bill, and they don't have an electric bill because they're producing enough solar to do for their electricity demand and their heating and cooling demand. So I just wanted to show that as an example as well. So that is the extent of content that I prepared for you guys relative to innovative housing projects. I realize that was very high level, but given the amount of detail that exists in most of those documents, I didn't want to spend a lot of time digging into details.
Thanks so much, James. I asked James just to do a teaser for everyone because I knew we'd only have so much time, and usually the data takes up a good amount of time. And since we had such that conversation last time about affordable housing, I thought James could give us a teaser on some recent options, plus everyone's definitions of what you have in your mind when we say manufactured or affordable or ADUs. I just think this is really helpful.
Sylvia, was there, so there's a lot of resources that were kind of shared. And I think it would be valuable for the board to have those. Could both presentations be sent to me?
Oh, absolutely. And if it's of interest, we can actually add some of these things to the webpage or,
Yeah, absolutely.
things like that. But we'll definitely, we'll get those to you.
Why don't we do that? Post them to the website and I'll just link them from there.
Okay.
The popularity of ADUs and tiny homes, which are basically mobile homes, unfortunately is forcing the cost of these to increase drastically. So it's almost
Getting worse.
cost prohibitive. It's not worth what you think you're saving.
That's a good point, actually. Just to, and I think when you're looking at these options, I mean, you have, it's just natural. You have what's in your head, what your experience is, but then you have to kind of look at what the market is, and you got to look at those economic indicators.
Demand.
And demand. So, yeah, so that's really kind of, so what I took away from both those presentations, if I'm just going to be a little frank, one, no one can afford a home. Two, the homes that people can afford are
Somewhere
not
else.
the homes that we live in today. So I think that's, as I don't want to sound pessimistic, but that's a pretty somber view.
What I think,
I'm definitely trying to find the silver lining. And
I think what Marge said before is actually part of the silver lining of this. Like, if you look at the town of Milford, most of that downtown, which y'all think is beautiful, would be illegal today, even under their own zoning. And it's so, some of these things are styled more in a way that preserves the look and feel of our town. It's not a giant apartment building. But it's a smaller square footage. It goes back to some of those things that they used to build that we've lost, and I think that's why they even called it in there, losing the middle of housing, because we've gotten into these big houses that, where we are in this market, in this community, the average person can't afford it. Certainly, there's no starter homes anymore for that. So something like that, while even the market may take that up, it's not gonna be as much as if you're buying a regular size house in this community, if you're trying to find something to live as a person that went to high school here or something else.
I think that, about a half an hour ago, somebody mentioned the boom that was happening and the growth of the schools, and after World War II, when the veterans came home, there wasn't any housing really, and that's when Levittown was built, and these homes were small homes. There were 2-3 bedroom starter homes, 1-story ranch. Most of them didn't have a basement. They were tightly packed. I think that speaks to zoning. So if we want to accommodate that kind of development, we would have to create zoning where maybe the minimum lot is half an acre or a third of an acre, and create areas of town where you can build that. Build these smaller, I don't know, Sylvia, 1,500 square foot homes. I am an architect, 1,500 square foot homes or whatever, but those are not the homes you're going to raise 4 or 5 kids in or 3 kids. They're starter homes for a young couple that might have a baby or whatever. The other thing about it, I think this town actually is very fortunate because a lot of communities do not allow auxiliary units.
It's a state
Really,
law
it's
that they have
unusual.
to.
Pardon me?
It's a state law that they have to.
Right. Well, that's New Hampshire, but any other place that you really, like back in the Midwest, it's very tough. So it's great you could do that. You could build another house if you had a minimum property of X acreage. And the other thing I was going to say about that is not just for young people. There's people in my community, we have a newer house built 3-4 years ago, that have the in-laws living with them in those units. So that speaks to the other part of the argument about people aging in place and living with their sons or daughters. So, if we want to have smaller homes, the great stuff, the gentleman shares some great stuff. You have to zone for it and allow for smaller lots, but you got to be, again, careful where you put those, because if you put them next to a place where you have 4,000 square foot homes, it's going to impact those people's values.
Right.
Anyway, but great stuff.
Folks, any other comments? So I think the next item on our agenda, photo sharing initiative on the master plan website. Sylvia?
Let me just quick do this so you can all see. So, you go to your own master plan steering committee website. Here we go. And master plan website. So we now have this, send us a photo. We talked about that at the last meeting. There's a little form here you upload, and so for all those watching, because there's so many folks at home watching this, I'm sure, if you want to share what type of housing would you like to see in Londonderry, maybe it's that missing middle. What would you like to see? You can share that, fill out that form, and here again is the survey if people want to see that survey report. So just wanted to show that. It's right up here on the master plan website. Let's get out of that.
Excellent.
And the only other thing to share, we did have a very successful presentation at the Senior Resource Committee, with the Senior Resource Committee. I forget if that was just last week, or I think it was the first week in January, and yeah, it was well appreciated, and it was very interesting because we compared, I did an hour and 15-minute presentation comparing what older folks have, how they participated in all those questions compared to the broader group, as well as some comparisons between, because Jake, you had mentioned you're really interested in what younger folks had to say. So I also did a comparison of some of the questions with younger folks, and I think that was much appreciated. John was there, that's why I'm turning and looking at John. So that also happened successfully.
John, could you just come to the, sorry.
I think going forward, that's going to be used almost as a handbook when you come up to a lot of different issues. We're gonna go
Yeah,
back to that.
sorry, John, right to the mic.
John Wilson, 3 Tranquil.
No,
the
microphone.
The mic. It's for the folks at home.
John Wilson, Tranquil Drive. I just want to thank Sylvia again for doing it. But we had a presentation and was very good. But she had handouts of the presentation, and I think that is going to be a handbook for us for a lot of different issues to come up. We're going to go back to that presentation again and again. It's stuffed with information that'll help us. So I really appreciate it.
Sylvia, is that presentation on our website as well?
No, but I'm gonna make a point of that too.
Yeah.
Well, this
So-
website is
Growing by the minute.
growing with resources that this committee can use. It's great. Good.
Can I make another comment while I'm up here?
Absolutely, John. Go ahead.
It's kind of off the track a bit, but when Art gave his presentation, okay, I was thinking about that, and I was here for that period of time also. And one of the things that's interesting about what's happened is that back then, we had super growth, okay? And the problem with the growth then was the schools. We went through, we paid for a lot of money out for schools over a bunch of years. Now we've got rapid growth again, but it's not a school problem, it's the roads. And I sat there thinking about why is that so different? And I think part of it is that when we started building all these houses, we put in streets, okay? And we didn't start with 1-lane streets like they would do in England, okay? We had a 2-lane street, okay? And we built those all over town, okay? Now, as things, we do that over and over and over again, okay? We built up a surplus of capacity on all these streets when we first built them that we didn't really need, okay? So what's happened now, we've got people coming in, but they don't have nearly as many children, okay? But they're there. And they're usually, 2 people living in a house, they both work, they both drive. So now, all of our 2-lane roads, okay, that we had all this capacity built up before, now they're now we have no capacity for streets and we're stuck, okay? And I think that logically works. What's bad about that is it is horrendously expensive to solve that problem. Just horrendously expensive. So, hope that makes some sense.
I wanted to make one comment too on when Art was speaking and he talked about the moratorium and the legality or illegality of it. And he talked about, having a reason for it, and one of it had to do with infrastructure, supporting the infrastructure of your town. But do they take into consideration the people from other places that are coming in and using our roads on a regular basis that are also impacting our infrastructure? It's not just the people living in Londonderry. It's others.
You're saying the people that live in Hudson that need to use Londonderry to get to work.
Or Market
Exactly.
Basket.
Not only Hudson, but they're going to the mall in of New Hampshire. Wherever they're going, they're on roads that are our town roads.
Well, in addition to that, look at how much business, people that are working here now. Yes, we've increased houses, but we've also increased businesses, right? Like back then, we didn't have Home Depot. And when did Market Basket come? You know what I mean? Like just
Right,
looking at some of
absolutely.
that's
Yes.
the airport. How much has been built up there? All those people that have to travel here,
Correct.
or those FedEx or whatever's up there that's traveling now because their hubs
New
are
Balance
there,
now.
Right, right.
So just another point to you of it's
Yeah.
not just the people, it's what type of
Exactly. All of this is impacting roads, so I'm kind of just interested in that and curious.
I have a question. Mr. Chair, actually for Sylvia, because there's been a lot of talk, you would know better than anybody here, in southern New Hampshire, in the 14 towns, about traffic and traffic studies, and especially in the high-growth towns like Merrimack and to a certain extent Londonderry, Bedford, others, right? And there's all these choke points and all this traffic coming in, not just residential, but, businesses and so on. Is Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission looking at that more holistically in the whole region?
It just so happens that James is also doing a region-wide metropolitan transportation plan, and that looks at the bigger picture. Our group is also looking at congestion management plan. Zach's involved with that, so we're doing a lot of work right now, and that involves all that traffic, yeah, so
Is that going to be published?
it always is.
Okay. Do you
can
know when
always
that's?
find, and, so that congestion management plan, I'm not sure, Zach, are you still there, or?
I'm still here. What's the question?
When the congestion management plan might be ready for public viewing?
That's more of a question for Dave. Most of the modeling and such has been done. I would think, obviously this year.
No.
So, this year, that's good.
Hopefully within 6 months.
We're keeping you to that, Zach.
Okay, good.
I'd be very interested in
Yeah,
that
'cause
when that comes
would
out.
definitely be my
Yeah.
next
I think
question.
everybody would be interested in
And
that.
of
Everybody
course-
would be.
So this will probably, all of these things, since right now we're on regional impacts and housing and land use, it all relates. I know it all relates, and you get fingers in, it's a web, right? So it goes into transportation. But we will have a really good chance to talk about transportation. I think that is in our third phase. I think that ended up in our last phase of the master plan process. We can always move that after we finish these chapters, but I believe
It
that
seems
was.
prudent to kind of, the information that would be beneficial for that chapter
Yeah.
is ready to be,
Yeah.
potentially published in the next, 6 months or so here to kind of keep that. It's complete information.
Yep.
And the work that Jim is doing on the MTP, that information is really great. Jim just finished a survey of the region, and so there were a lot of data points that were provided to us in feedback on transportation priorities in the region, and we could always have Jim do a presentation on that and do sort of a Londonderry-centric, kind of view on that.
That'd be great.
That
Yeah.
I would hold that off until we're sort of
Right.
closer into doing transportation chapter, but that's certainly something that our team could do.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. I just brought it up because it seems to be a issue with a lot of our clients, and we're talking about it here in town, and I know you guys are doing that.
Oh, yeah, we're doing
And-
a lot of work.
And it impacts outreach in the communities because of traffic impacts, fire service access to increasingly bigger areas of towns, public safety, police, DPW, but also choke points, and those choke points are key, right? So,
Right?
yeah.
Sylvia, what's for next steps? I believe that we are probably where are we with kind of drafting the chapters, other presentations?
The last time we met, there was a sort of the whole group wanted to talk about affordable housing and what kind of event that might look like, what would that be? So that's why I brought in Zach and Jim to sort of give you some, what we did tonight. And then I'm not sure where other people on the group were going to check in with, I think, their resources. So I mean, we could keep diving down this, or what I would like to do actually is have subcommittees from this subcommittee, so smaller working groups that start to tackle the specifics with our 3 areas, which is regional impacts, housing, and land use. And I would love to start drafting chapters based on the feedback we've heard so far, because I really think we have a lot of good feedback. And from just the survey report, there's a lot of, information there that we could start drafting. I mean, I hate to do that in a silo. I'd rather have feedback or a smaller group to work with. So I'd like to start that process. We can take an easier one if you like. We can wait on housing till the end, but start with sort of regional and work our way from there to land use, and then save housing for the last. But I'm interested in your thoughts.
Is there an outline somewhere that we can find online of how we're phasing this whole master plan process?
Yeah, and if it's not already on our website, on the master plan website, we can put it there. But I can certainly send to Jeff. We had decided this way back when. If you probably look at an old email back from like June or July, you have that already. But yeah, we have it in 3 phases. And so, I can get you that, Martha.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's always good to kind of remind us where we are and, where we're definitely heading towards. So I think, definitely sharing that out is important. And I can take that action. With that, we did discuss having kind of a community feedback session prior to building kind of drafting those chapters.
Yeah, so I guess how does this
Right.
board want that to look? And would you want to dovetail with an existing event, or just have your own event? That's kind of where we started.
I feel like we kind of have the feedback through the survey.
Yeah.
We need to start to act on the feedback of the survey.
Yeah.
I don't know that we necessarily need
Have a
an additional event. We have the feedback. We know how people feel, we know what they're saying.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that's going to be
Yeah.
coming from that.
I'm not sure, just go on Facebook.
There is that.
Getting really nasty.
There is going to be a public. I mean, once the chapters are drafted, there will be a public review and comment period. I'm assuming. Right? Does everyone kind of in agreement with that?
You just discussed putting housing last. I understand it's probably the most in-depth section of this, but I feel as though it's the biggest driving factor of the master plan right now is housing and the current state of housing in the town of Londonderry. I think that needs to be personally, I think that needs to be the primary focus right now. I think every piece of conversation anyone's having is about housing, what it looks like right now. I think there was some really good conversation out of the left corner over there on discussion of zoning. I think that's what we need to get into, which I know I've talked a little bit about, but I think whether it be a subgroup or, us as a group, we need to talk about our zoning, what is currently permitted, and if there are things that we feel as though need to be changed in our current zoning on items that are permitted, and then we need to discuss if there should be an additional, and add to our zoning. I think that there's 2 major things that came out of the survey. One was we have way too much housing, but the very next one was we need more affordable housing. So, but I think we need to talk about that, and I think we need to come up with what we think that looks like of how we change that. And I think I've said it before, I think a lot of it is a stigma towards giant apartment buildings.
Yeah.
People hate them. We need to talk about that. But we can't sit there and say, well, we're gonna get rid of apartment buildings, because then we get rid of the conversation of affordability. So we need to find that innovative way to allow some sort, or create some sort of affordability that is not in the form of a 30-unit apartment building in the, on the side of the road.
Yeah.
I think that's what
Yeah.
the real conversation is.
Yep.
I don't think people mind growth as much as they mind the way the growth looks. I think if you put 100 houses in the same spot that you were gonna put 100 units, people would feel differently about it. Maybe I'm wrong.
I agree.
You know, I think that, one of the densest developments in Londonderry is one you live in. People love it. You don't ever hear anybody complain about what you live in.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
because it's
0.8
a phenomenal
acres, yeah.
community.
Yeah,
You know,
a lot of
But if
open
that-
space.
Correct. I think what are you? 270 units. 270.
Oh, it's not
houses?
that many, no, it's 130 something.
160,
Yeah, it's
130,
not that
whatever
many.
it is.
Where
but,
is it?
Lorden Commons, but it's not as big as you said.
Yeah, but if it was 130 apartment buildings, it would be the
That'd be
biggest
a big issue.
conversation of the
Even
town of
130
Londonderry.
apartments.
Right.
So,
I would just like to say, if I can, that I agree with you, because I think that we have to understand. I think people bristle at these large PUDs that are coming up, and 1,300 homes, you know, over there, or 380 apartments here, or whatever, or Woodmont, or whatever. So people feel they have no control over it, right? So I think I would agree with you that if we can agree as a group, you know, in the community, to your point, Mr. Chair, what that might look like, where people can feel more bought into the process and understand the mix of things that the community might want. You can't say no apartments, like you said, right? You can't. Or we want smaller homes on smaller lots. That will inform the zoning, right? And we could decide where that goes within the town, or recommend where it should go within the town.
Correct.
So I sit on the zoning board. Karen knows that. I mean, then we can have a reworking of that zoning ordinance to accommodate everybody. I think that the anger that you see and the people are upset about and come to the planning board and so on, is these large PUDs. They may never stop, right?
Right.
But providing a more organized way to accommodate it may help. I just wanted to share that.
So I think
Thank you.
very good. No, that makes sense. So how do we get there, right? So how do we have a structured conversation that's informed by facts and data, that doesn't, that takes out the emotion that these conversations will kind of bring up? And Jake, to your point, and Rob, I totally 100% agree with you there. I'm okay with tackling housing and everything that goes with that. And, let's, definitely start there. Do we want to take our next meeting in a month, third Thursday of the month, it's after Valentine's Day, just for those that celebrate.
Or if you want to bring chocolate.
Do we want to have a structured conversation that leads to actionable insights that could be put into our draft
we do.
report?
I think we need to talk about what each one of us feels as though is the solution to what we just discussed.
Right.
Sylvia,
That's where it starts.
Is that something that that you would be able to facilitate with us?
I think we need a different setting for that. I almost feel like we need to be at tables,
Like a workshop.
and have structured questions, and we can do a draft of those questions. I can work with our team. The other thing I'd want is, Zach just told us the other day, if not today, that the American Survey information is in, so he may be able to provide us with some of the basic demographic information, because, we want the facts, right? And that really helps just center everyone around facts. And I think that would help if we could have some of those demographic figures updated from like maybe what's in the last master plan. We can take a look at that and see what would be helpful towards that conversation. And then the other thing we can do is I can break out some of the really clear messages from the survey and sort of, you know, focus on anything that's specifically housing and clear messages. So that might help that discussion. Do you think that would work? I'm looking at Jake because I just want to make sure.
Why are you looking at me?
Because.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think the conversation that needs to be had goes into zoning, and
Yeah,
we need
zoning.
we
Yes.
need to discuss, I think as a group, the discussion needs to be, what do we change in our zoning to accommodate what we know based off of the
Survey
survey,
results.
which
Well,
we know is, how do we need to discuss how we can accommodate affordable housing with, to me, is a different type of density, is the
So-
way I see it.
I'm a little concerned with that because we're not going to do an assessment of our zoning ordinance. That work is through
The planning board.
the HOP grant and planning board. This group is guiding, the idea with the master plan is to guide and provide recommendations. If the recommendation is to review obstacles to affordable housing, that would be a typical recommendation.
Yeah.
It isn't this group's job to now, let's open the zoning ordinance and review where the roadblocks are. That's not where you want to go.
I agree.
Well, you personally may want to go there,
Yeah.
but not this committee.
Fair.
And
So-
Kelly, I see Kelly's got off the mic.
Ellie has unmuted herself.
I'm not yelling on my end, but it might be too loud for you, so I apologize. Absolutely agree with what Sylvia just said. She beat me to the punch. We're going to end up, in my opinion, too much in the weeds with this group and your tasks that you're supposed to be focusing on if we essentially start talking about doing a zoning audit as it relates to housing. Again, that is something that we are utilizing the HOP grant for. We are using the Regional Planning Commission for that effort as well. So I think, again, it makes sense for this group to make recommendations related to that separate effort. And that will also help us prioritize that effort as well and the tasks associated with it. You know, I just think back to when we first started talking about the master plan update. One of the primary points that I recall is trying to get this done as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I think when we start these kind of more detailed
I agree,
in-the-weeds
Kelly.
discussions,
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
that is going to take us down a road I don't believe that we
So-
intended initially to go down.
So let's,
just my thoughts.
thank you, Kelly. I 110%, I agree with that. Let's, but let's make an action here. We don't have to wait for the final report to get a final recommendation. We can start recommending things as we receive the information.
True.
So why don't, I would entertain a motion to, recommend to the appropriate, to the planning board and town council and
Everybody.
everybody.
Land use boards.
The appropriate land use boards, to open up our zoning, to have, discussion, open up and our zoning boards. I'm not actually quite sure what that recommendation would say, but that's kind of the intent of that.
So once again, this committee is going to draft, and I'm going to say, James and Zach, you guys go ahead. Thank you for your time.
We would recommend
We're going to be chatting for a little while, so thanks for tonight. We may call you back. All right, back,
Thank you.
so back to the discussion. So I think what we want to do is draft chapters, draft recommendations, then you bring it to the planning board for their approval of those chapters. That's typically what you do.
Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then let's, okay, yeah, maybe we are going down a little too much in the weeds, and maybe, maybe that is, but let's start to kind of get some action and some actionable items in front of us to make those appropriate recommendations.
So I just had a question, because Kelly's right, I agree with Kelly. Would a recommendation look like, I'm just role-playing here, look like this, because it was mentioned earlier tonight, is to say that we recommend that certain areas of land use in town would be zoned for minimum half-acre lots for homes not exceeding, smaller homes, basically, is a recommendation. Is that where Kelly's, did she leave us, or is she still there? Is that what you're referring to? It's a recommendation.
Correct.
I just want to hear from Kelly as well. Is that correct? That kind of a recommendation.
I think she did go.
So
I think she's gone. But anyway, I just wanted to test the water, because that's what it sounds like to me.
I think
That's what I'm
you
getting
just
at.
think
It's like,
general.
let's make that's what it is. Let's make the recommendation to look into.
Just asking a question,
Yeah,
that's all.
I agree.
All right, yeah, I just want action.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, and we're getting a lot of pressure to get some action. So.
Yeah.
I won't be here next meeting, but talking about drafting stuff, I would say come with a draft. Somebody, whether,
Yep.
because if we come and we sit here, we're gonna talk for another hour about what we should put in.
Yes.
Come with, we wanna talk about, recommendations to the planning board and affordable housing, which I think that's a pretty broad, cause some of this has helped with what's affordable.
Right.
But just cause we build a small house on a small lot of land doesn't make it affordable right now with the market. And I mean, I'm not a real estate agent, but what can we do with that other than saying, like, telling the town, hey, you need to start telling builders they can't charge a lot? I mean, like, that's,
Yeah.
to
Can't do
me,
that.
you can't, but that's
doesn't
what I
work like
mean,
that. You can't
the
do that.
affordability discussion here is not a Londonderry problem. It's
no.
Right.
It's a country
Yeah.
problem,
Right.
right? So, but just from being in big groups with this, with my career, I would recommend, even if it's just bullet points to expand out so that you get action on what do we want the first paragraph, or not first paragraph, first section on housing to be. Have something in writing so everybody can look and have the printed results of the survey for that section, so we can kind of go back and forth, because if we don't have it, we're gonna be like, oh, go here, but if everyone has everything in front of them, like you said, a working meeting in a different setting, I just think it'll be more productive. That's just my opinion, because we're still trying to write it right now, I feel like, when in actuality, we really just need something drafted for next week. These are the topics we want to talk about. Yeah, maybe I'm out of line there, but that's my
No,
thought.
you're,
I think you're
Caroline.
feeling exactly how we're feeling.
all right, Sylvia, taking all that in.
Okay.
There's my
Done.
planning, there's my project management coming out.
I
of me.
just,
Well,
I
what we can do is I'll work with my team. We'll draft up something for you to work with. How's
Yes.
that?
Perfect.
Something that you respond to. And it will not be, I will try to reach that sweet point that is not too much in the weeds and not so general, like we need affordable
You're gonna get in the
housing.
weeds a little bit. You're
Yeah.
gonna get in the weeds a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I'll work on that. Anyway, Kelly did text me. She had another meeting.
Okay. Marge?
I just have concern that we are setting ourselves up for public ire if we don't include public input before we make actual recommendations to the planning board.
Yeah.
I think we led
Oh, I
people
agree.
to,
Oh, I agree.
led people to
I
believe that there would
totally-
be,
No, I totally agree with you. What I
Okay,
was getting at is, we already have, he asked about another public session to get more data. We already have the data. Let's put together a recommendation and bring it to the public, not just have another meeting to have more.
well,
Yeah.
I,
Oh, yeah. No.
I say, yeah.
You didn't
draft,
get it, but
recommend,
if-
and invite.
if
come
you
or
read
don't.
any of the booklets that I gave you, it says you want to bring people in at the beginning. You don't want to present something and say, hey, what do you think? Because then you've done it to them.
Right.
People don't like change unless they participate in creating that change. You have to make the public feel part of the change. And you have to get them involved early on.
You don't
But
think,
it
you don't
We
think a
did
survey
that.
was
Not,
that quick?
but not like that. I mean,
How do you mean? I'm just curious,
How do you
because
do that?
look at
What
the,
else do you-
nobody's.
Yeah.
the last time we did master plan, we had charrettes, or, I remember sitting around, had round tables in here with
Yes.
maps and,
Yep.
and people,
People came and were involved. Can I,
Your budget
this
may have been a little
generation-
different.
like, doesn't? There,
we
maybe,
have a list of names of people who said they wanted to be
so let's
involved.
invite them.
So,
Exactly.
right, so our,
Let's-
yeah.
But we need to.
But
I
that's what
still
we
feel
need to
like
give
we
something
need
to
to give them. I don't
discuss
want to
with
have
them.
them here, so we're sitting
If we
here
invite
getting
them,
more
if we
survey.
invite them right now, they're gonna come up and say everything they said in the survey. So we need to create something
Here's our
that says, hey,
thoughts.
this is what we're thinking, what do you think?
Yes.
I
Or we're
would-
just gonna keep going like this, which we've done
I
now.
wouldn't do it with anything stronger than this is what we're thinking.
Yeah.
That's,
okay.
absolutely.
Yes, that's my
But like,
thought.
we need to bring them something.
We get a draft, we work on
Yeah.
a draft, we say, hey, everybody, mass blast email. We have a meeting this day, this time to go over what we're thinking based on your surveys. Please show up. They don't show up, moving on.
Correct, but I think that we need
Yes.
something
I
to
agree.
have nothing to present to them and have them come in and discuss.
And we can say,
I don't
this
even
is
know
how
what
we've
to
gotten this
discuss.
data,
This
we've
big,
had
it's
people
gotta
come
be-
in.
That's what I'm saying, that's why we gotta put something together, we've talked a little bit about zoning and housing, we need to put something together for it, and then have something to be able to present to the general public, and say, what do you think? What are your thoughts of our first take on this? What do we need to change? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Until we have that, all we have is a conversation
We have a survey still.
about a survey. We're trying to get past that.
I have a question too about all of this, that, we talked earlier about the 80s and the boom in the 80s. That's when I moved here as well. And there was a lot of open land then and all those houses are now on that land, on those streets that we built at that point in time. I would really like to know what buildable land we have in Londonderry. Where can we talk about putting this zoning? I don't know the answer to that as a member of this
I don't
committee.
think we can even do that from what I get. Like, we can understand the buildable land, but in the end, we're saying, hey, this is what we're hearing, and then it's up to the zoning to be like, ooh, this land is land we probably should protect, right? Not,
And Martha, I think to your point, I think the planning department does have that, so I'll make
Yeah.
sure to get
He
that
does have
for
that.
this
I
group as
think,
well.
Okay.
Lynn, didn't we get something presented to us about buildable land left in Londonderry, like 2 years ago? 2-3 years ago? Yeah.
Well, I just think that would be valuable and as part of our discussion for us to know that in order to come up with whatever we're going to be writing for this next meeting and discussing, because that will give us a lot better idea of what we have to work with.
No, it's a good point. and
or a
I think-
percentage of the town that's still buildable.
Infrastructure, where the location of existing
Sewers,
infrastructure,
Yeah. Sewer, water,
gas.
gas.
I think that's actually incredibly important to understand all of those data points and where they, what we need. Is there, if you think of it, of others, let me know, and we'll definitely we'll get that out.
So we're going to make the next agenda a working session.
Yeah, but it's gonna be a
Looking
workshop.
at data, looking at the survey results, and we will provide perhaps, and also looking at the last master plan, I think that would also be a good idea.
Yep.
And what had been recommended then, but what we might suggest for now, based on the most recent
No, nothing was implemented.
survey comments. All right? All right.
Can I just, I have a little tidbit. New Hampshire Housing is having a homeownership conference on March 18th from 8 to 12:30. and they are exploring the latest insights shaping New Hampshire housing, in looking into innovative local solutions to the housing crisis, and hear expert predictions from a top economist.
What was that date?
How is that gonna, where is gonna be held?
At the Grapponi Center in Concord.
Okay.
If you go to New Hampshire Housing's website, it comes up immediately on the first page.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I have a flyer if you want to see it.
All right, other business, we did have a resignation from this committee. So I thank Christy for her service. She was invaluable, the last, 6 months, or so. Definitely wish her, obviously wish her the best, and, just wanting to publicly state that her, contributions were invaluable. That said, we do need a new secretary. So if anybody is, was chomping at the bit the last time to be nominated, your shot is now. If not, think hard, and I'll be looking for a nomination at our next meeting as well. So is there anyone that was chomping at the bit?
I'm already secretary on something else.
All right, so think it over. You might receive a call from me.
Good thing you don't like.
Anyways, so I definitely, that said,
Motion
there's
to adjourn?
any other business?
Just a quick question, Mr. Chair. So we were under a pretty tight timeline when we kicked off this subcommittee, or this committee. Where are we at, or do we have an updated timeline for when we want to finish, or how we're going to get to where we want to finish?
Let me do that too. We had a very, very aggressive timeline. We're obviously out of sync with that aggressive timeline.
Yeah, Sylvia, I think some of that had to do with, some of the transitions that, occurred. Now that, with Kelly's back, maybe you and Kelly could kind of recalibrate that timeline.
Okay.
Because I still think, 6 to 9 months of the committee is probably prudent.
We're in 6 months.
I get that, but let me finish talking.
How did
So-
that happen?
So we do want to kind of realistically, where are we?
Yep. It helps me motivate myself when I know I have a deadline that I have to meet. So, and right now, I don't know what the deadline
That was
is.
a good question.
Right.
That was a great
Yeah.
question.
Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, Mr. Chair.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you all.